Now, there have been growing calls for the African National Congress to be transparent on its cadre deployment policy. The party is alleged to have aided state capture, including the deployment of ANC loyalists to head state-owned entities who later facilitated their looting. On Wednesday, ANC National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe defended the governing party's deployment policy amid calls for it to be scrapped. Mantashe said the party did not have a cadre deployment policy as coined by the Democratic Alliance, adding it did have a deployment policy. He's also added that the ANC prepares its own cadres so that they can be able to handle bigger responsibilities. To unpack this further, I'm joined by Professor Ivor Sarakinsky, a political analyst there, to unpack this. A very good morning to you. Thank you for your time. Mantashe has been very firm as he started off at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry in his opening statement, differentiating the differences between cadre deployment and a deployment policy. What did you make of what he had to say, and what the bigger impact will then be for the ruling party at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry?
Morning, Mpho and viewers. Semantics, a bit of obfuscation in the way he tried to demarcate between two processes that are actually all in one, in terms of cadres being developed to take up roles, and then a deployment committee deploying those trained up and upskilled cadres. Both sides of the same coin, in my view.
And when it comes to the understanding of the policy, you know, we've heard the ANC defending it, saying that it's misplaced, very much like what Gwede Mantashe did yesterday. But is there real evidence to show that it is indeed, you know, friendships and those favored in positions without the necessary skills and, you know, ability to carry out the roles of the work that they're tasked with?
So we now know that about over 3,000 senior managers in the public servants don't have the qualifications they ought to have. So the question then is, how did they get into the public service? And I'm afraid one has to start to look at deployment or cadre deployment, whichever one wants to use as a term here, as part of the explanation. So if you have a policy of deploying party loyalists into the public service, while your intentions might be noble, there are a whole range of dynamics that occur that you can't control, and that's where the abuse can kick in terms of networks being established that only look at applications in certain ways from certain people. In other words, some kind of party loyalty determining access to employment in the public sector. And if you are going to deploy people in that way, you need a rigorous process. You need a clear meritocratic criteria. You need an objective selection process that's documented, and you need to be able to document every single decision in terms of how people end up being in the public service. So there are a whole range of steps missing in terms of how the policy is conceptualized and how it's implemented, and a lot goes wrong in between.
Mantashe also said that you know, the party was within its rights to deploy trusted and competent cadres into the state to drive transformation and implement its election manifestos. What have been the biggest challenges and ongoing trends that we've witnessed with this policy, especially looking at the poor state of SOEs?
Indeed. So it's not an unusual practice around the world in developed democracies as well. As a government changes, a new government comes in, and you have the exit of senior officials going back to universities often, with new officials often from universities, other universities coming in to manage the top echelon of the public service. Nothing unusual about that. but you've got a large pool of technocratic ability that's politically aligned in those countries. In South Africa, we've got a different problem. We don't have a large pool of technocratic ability in and outside of the universities, the private sector that can move in and out of the public sector in terms of deployment. So this is where the problem comes in. You want to, and there are good reasons for this, to get state-owned enterprises to implement and execute government policy. But if you don't have the technocratic expertise to run these state-owned enterprises properly, you're bound to end up with trouble in terms of ineffective management, ineffective financial controls. And then if you look at the politics that this kind of policy enables, there shouldn't be any surprises that we've ended up where we have in terms of state capture.
You say that it's nothing unusual, and, of course, it brings to question then how best can this practice then be implemented to ensure that it is effective when it comes to transformation and of not aiding corruption and state capture?
In the context of state-owned enterprises, it means that one has to restructure the governance practices in these institutions in terms of how senior officials are appointed in management and how the boards are appointed by the minister. Without changing the politics at that level, you aren't going to be able to ensure that you get the best technically qualified people into these positions to run complicated organizations and important organizations. In the public service in general, it means that the letter of the Public Service Act and a whole range of other pieces of legislation have to be executed and implemented perfectly with documentation and accountability in Parliament. And this is where the politics comes in. You've got people in Parliament of a party performing oversight of officials from the same party, and there's some issues there in terms of the independence of parliamentarians in holding the executive and the public service to account for their performance. So politics at a range of levels interferes with this whole deployment policy and the attraction of expertise into the public service in administration and in state-owned enterprises.
What do you imagine to be the impact of, voters and the general public listening in to these conversations and getting a detailed understanding of what happens within the ANC? Do you see some of these conversations which are coming out of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry having a dent on the performance of the ANC come election time?
It's possible that the revelations, which are not flattering to the ANC, will affect the sentiment of the voting public. Will they swing to other parties? Difficult to say. My guess is that we'll see lower turnout based on a decrease in public trust in the political system to respond to citizens' needs. So I think what we're seeing as a result of this is a general wave, a ripple of cynicism in terms of politics, democracy, public institutions performing, and I think citizens are just going to stay away in greater numbers.
Very well. Thank you for your time, Professor, Political Analyst Professor Sarakinsky, weighing in there on cadre deployment and the impact of such a process.